I'd like to give you a bit of an introduction to prose fiction. Now, you're probably obviously really familiar with it, but I just want to change a little bit or address how you think about prose fiction for the purposes of your study in literature. So prose is written or spoken language in its ordinary form without metrical structure, basically not poetry. Fiction, literature in the form of prose that describes imaginary events and people. Bit of a helpful definition. Now, there's a famous ballet dancer named Isadora Duncan who was asked once what her dance meant. And her reply was, if I could tell you what it meant, there would be no point in dancing it. So I think it's a really helpful way as a starting point where we're not trying to extract a confession from the stories we read. They're really prompts for us to do some thinking. So let's begin then with what we think might be the purpose of prose writing. And here are some definitions that might give you a bit of a starting point. The first one, to inform, educate, or provoke thought. Or we could look at it as a way to explore human experiences, emotions, and relationships. We could look at it to reflect societal values and challenge norms. Or another way we could think about the purpose is to explore, challenge, and play with the possibilities of language and genre and push the boundaries of reader expectation. Do you know what though? I find a lot of those definitions, uninspiring. I like to think that the purpose of prose fiction is to blow you away with stories, language, and ideas. It captures everything we want from good prose fiction. And so when you are engaging with it at school or in all of that, we're looking at the interconnectedness of things, about looking at how all the constituent parts in it are linked together and work together. We might be in the habit of thinking of plot on its own or characterization on its own, conflict, but they are all interconnected. And when we see the interconnections between those things, it deepens our understanding and it actually makes the interrogation of stories, the deconstruction of stories, a lot of fun to have. But I'd like to come back to what do we think stories are doing, or what the author is doing. Well, sometimes the author is inviting the reader to explore ideas with them. At other times, the author is interrogating societal values and really unpicking what the gears of society are. Sometimes a story or the author wants to hold others up for judgment or ridicule. And yet other times, the author wants to explore complex human relationships and conflicts. Reading, then, is about bridging the gap between the creator and the audience of the text. And there will always be a gap. There's for teachers, it's frustrating, and for students, to this question of, did the author intend that? Which, it doesn't always matter if the author intended it, because there's always a gap between what the intent of a text is and what our interpretation is. And that's the fun of reading prose fiction. So here are some tips, I guess, to help you on your journey exploring prose fiction. Start with the story. It's first and foremost a storytelling medium. Appreciate the story on its own terms and the meaning will emerge. Meaning's a conversation. It's not an interrogation. We aren't trying to beat a confession from the story. What conversation does the story want us to keep having after we've finished reading it? Listen to the language. And this takes some time and practice, but to hear the language, when the words on the page sound really interesting, when they sound amazing, you can bet there's something there worth talking about. Listen to the sounds of it. Listen not just to whether big words are used, but what it sounds like, the musicality, I guess, of the language. Now, the only thing that the author owns is the copyright. So stories can have multiple meanings, and some of those were not intended by the author. You're the reader. It's your story now. If you're going to create an interpretation that might not have been intended by the author, that's fine, so long as you can justify that through the reading of the text with evidence from the text. In fact, it's one of the fun things to do in literature. And all you're really trying to do is make connections. Make connections between various elements of the story, make connections to the world, make connections to other texts, but make connections, and you'll find your understanding and appreciation of prose fiction will grow. Reading literature is a fun thing we can do if we allow ourselves to enjoy it, if we allow ourselves not just to think that there's some code we're trying to crack, but try and use it as a jumping off point for some great conversations. Good luck.